John, thanks for taking some time with me today. I've been honestly very excited about this conversation ever since we arranged it a couple of 3 or 4 weeks ago, whenever it was, just because you and I have some mutual friends and some acquaintances, and even though they're sort of distant, I followed your career from a distance
Oh,
from 30 or 40 years now, and I've just been super. Andrew Peterson is a friend of mine, and so I every time I ask Andrew about career stuff or whatever,
right.
it always ends up pivoting back to centricity and
Oh, goodness.
just how amazing you guys are.
Huh.
And so, which is, I know a few other artists as well, and that is not always the case.
Well, it's amazing how if you pay your artist cash to say good things about you, how they'll respond. So,
Well, I know that's not the case with Andrew. Andrew, at least in my relationship with him, he is an inveterate truth teller. So
that is that is
he
true.
he can't be bought off.
Yeah, right.
Like I say, I've just known great things about Centricity for a while, and honestly, I got to tell you that one of your PR people was actually pitching one of your artists to me to do an interview, and I said, I'm not really interested in that artist, but I would love to interview John Mays. Do you think you could work that out? And so here we are.
Probably shouldn't know who that artist is then. It might come back on me.
Well, it was a band, and it was or a duo, and they're great, they're
Yeah,
fantastic,
yeah.
but they just what kind of wasn't a great fit for us. And
Yeah.
the reason that I wanted to have you on, John, is because two or three things. I mean, in my role here at Ministry Watch, and I write for Christianity Today and World Magazine, it seems that unfortunately, a lot of the things that I write about are artists and individuals, ministry leaders that start well and end badly.
Hmm.
And you have been at this for a very long time. You've worked with some artists that, have had very distinguished careers. And I guess I kind of wanted to explore that idea with you just a little bit
Sure.
before we hang up. But before we do that, just maybe a quick rundown for some of the folks that are not who are listening, who are not fanboys and fangirls of John Mays and Centricity like I am. You got your start in Christian music a very long time ago by modern reckoning, considering how much has happened in music. You started as a bass player. You were an actual artist yourself. You were a musician. Can you say a little bit about that era in your life and how you got started in music and in that and moving to Nashville?
Yeah, I'll bet with so many people you would talk to, there's this a commonality about kids who were raised in church who maybe like I was raised in a tiny Pentecostal church out in rural West Texas. And to this day, I feel like I'm still unwinding some of that doctrine and theology, that I grew up under. But they were so supportive of my early music making. And so you got to be grateful for a little community like that who I was their music kid and they sent me off with their blessing when I had an opportunity to go to a school, like a music camp for a while. Met some guys at that camp. We gigged around in a band for a couple of years in East Texas. That band opened for a band out of Nashville. And probably those 2 years in Texas playing in bands were my most intense dues paying years. It was you get tested pretty easily about how badly do you want to do this? Do you want to do it enough to go hungry or not? And we certainly did. But that moved me to Nashville. I met my wife through that band. We married 14 months later and have been married be 48 years in October of this year. Once I got to town, played in some other bands, and then eventually that led to uh, session work, which is musicians who just record on other people's recordings and they use outside musicians, to play on their records. I did that for about 5 years. And during that season, that led to some songwriting and some independent production. And so all that combination of work made its way to a guy who was running Word Records at the time. And that guy's name was Neil Joseph. And he was the first one to hit me with the idea of moving to this label job called A&R, which I'd never heard of at the time. And that was in 1987. So that was a huge transition for me to move from self-employed musician guy who'd never had a real job to a record label owned by ABC, this big global conglomerate where there's office protocol and memos and water cooler talk and culture and all that that I had to get used to. But Neil was very helpful in helping me transition into that new life.
Well, John, I don't want to spend all of our time together on on things that took place 40 years ago, but you've said so many things that I do want to just unpack a little bit, and or just make a comment and get you to react maybe. Number one was the fact that, I mean, when you said you transitioned to a session player, I think maybe for people that don't know the music business that well, that they might not have caught the significance of that. I mean, being a session player means that you're very good at what you do, because session players, have it gets them off the road. I mean, being on the road is where a lot of musicians start, but it can be grueling, and there are just a whole lot of road warriors that a next step in their career, something that they really covet and aspire to, is to be good enough, get good enough to be session players, so that they don't have to travel all the time and they can.
Yes.
And so that, which leads me to really to this question: do you think your bona fides as a musician has paid dividends for you now as an A&R guy, and now with Centricity, but back in the day with Word and with Benson and with the other people that you were with?
Yeah.
Is that a help?
No doubt. In fact, there's a guitar player friend, Jerry McPherson. I don't know if you've ever heard of Jerry, but
Oh yeah.
still playing sessions to this day. Excuse me, but he used to call me the informer because I could talk both sides of musician language and label language, and a lot of people view those as opposite sides of the fence. But um, it gave me a language. I was able to talk to producers and musicians and songwriters because that's the life I'd come out of. So yeah, it was definitely helpful, and I think gave me some credibility. My first years at Word, I was now A&Ring some artists that I had played on their records before I had gone to work at Word. So they knew me as a bass player, and perhaps there was some respect that came from that, but it didn't mean that I knew how to do A&R very well. I still had to learn that.
Right. Well, let's talk about A&R a little bit, because that's kind of an inside baseball. It's jargony.
Yeah.
A&R technically speaking, stands for artists and repertoire, but it involves a lot. It involves understanding the art of the artist. It involves understanding the business of the label. It involves being a psychologist and den mother and hand holder. How do you define A&R?
Well, I would think I would have to break it down into basically four things that A&R people do. And I think every label would probably define A&R a little differently, but on any given day, any A&R person is going to be doing one of these four things, or multiple of them. So the first level is that you are the talent scout for the label. You're responsible for bringing artists to the table for your label to sign. In our case at Centricity, that's not an individual decision. It looks more like me bringing artists to almost present to the label to determine if it's a good fit for us and if everybody would believe in this artist. So that's the top level of responsibility, that sort of talent scout. Then the second one would be something I call song development. That artist that has newly been signed now might have 60, 70 songs they've written, they haven't recorded yet. So you're very much on the ground with them, trying to determine which of these songs are worthy to be recorded, which ones need to be worked on. Do we need to get you with a co-writer to finish this up? So a lot of song development work, in the belief that everything's about songs, right? So we probably spend more time there than any other place. The third would be overseeing the production of the recordings, whether that's a single or a whole record or an EP. You're hiring producers that report to you. They have some business stuff like timelines. They have deadlines. They have budgets they have to stay within. So you're overseeing all those things and trying to deliver the record on time and within budget. And then fourth, and that's probably what you were referring to, there's some sort of you're sort of the relationship manager with the artist. Uh, Everybody at the label should have a good relationship with the artist, but yours is different because it started with you, right? And there's something powerful about you if you're a creative and you're wandering around in the world asking the question, is my work any good or not? And someone comes along and says, I believe that it is. I believe what you're doing is good. It needs to be, the world needs to hear it. Well, there's a bond created in that lasts. I mean, the first artist I ever signed, a girl named Cindy Morgan, in 1989, I believe. We're still good friends to this day because I think of that connection, even though we only worked together about 5 years. So, as you were saying, that fourth piece of the role can take on friend, brother, pastor, counselor, things that you're not even qualified to do, but you find yourself in that role, or at least directing them to people who can help them with what they need.
John, in my preparation for our conversation, I listened to some other podcasts that you had done with other people, and you mentioned an artist that I think really says a lot about what an A&R guy really does, and it was J.J. Wells. You said that you got J.J. Weeks. You guys were developing him, and then suddenly I don't remember now where it was. It was either at a showcase or a small venue or a concert. You heard him sing Georgia on My Mind, the old Ray Charles song, and you just discovered something about him and his artistry and his voice that you had completely missed up until that moment. And you realized, oh, so that's what this guy is all about. We need to bring that in. Do I have that story right? Can you say more about that?
You do. That process of development, which really never ends because an artist is always growing and changing, but you're also trying to identify the place of overlap that like is their most honest place as a creative and the place that can be commercial, like that could people would want to spend money to go see and to buy their music. And that JJ had just hidden that from us. He kind of did it as a novelty to him when he sang that song, but it was so honest and real when he sang it. We're like, how have we missed this in you? So the next recording we did explored that whole side of him, and it was a lot of fun.
Yeah. John, I want to pivot a little bit in our conversation because I have a personal interest in this. I wrote a book probably 15 years ago called A Lover's Quarrel with the Evangelical Church, and I devoted one chapter to kind of media and music, and within that chapter, I devoted most of that chapter to a character named Becky. I first learned about Becky from Joe Paulo. Joe Paulo was the general manager here in Charlotte, where I live, of WRCM, and I've gotten to know Joe pretty well. And he introduced me to Becky, sort of Becky's influence on Christian radio. And of course, I got interested in that because I was really writing a book about the church and not so much about media in particular. But one of the things that struck me was that about Becky, and I'm going to ask you to define who Becky is in just a minute. But I mean, I think you know this, John, that Christian radio has a huge impact on worship in the church. I mean, if a song gets on the radio, worship leaders and pastors and, lay leaders are listening to that. And a week later or a month later or 2 months later, they're talking to their folks around them saying, hey, why don't we sing this song in our church? Yeah. And that whole vetting process of, that we used to go through, is a hymn theologically sound? Is it the kind of song that multi-generations can sing, or do you have to have this, Hollywood or or Broadway performance voice in order to sing it. All that stuff has kind of gone by the wayside, and now Becky chooses our worship songs, and it has a profound impact even on the theology that we teach in the church. So
Yeah.
now that I've kind of set all that up and why this idea is of interest to me, explain who Becky is.
Yeah. Becky is the personification of the demographic that listens to Christian radio. Uh, you know, every format of radio does this. In fact, Christian music was late to it. They didn't start doing it until the early 90s. But pop, hip hop, rock, country, they all first identify who their listener is through a bunch of research. Then once that's done and they have established that demographic, they decide they need to find out what songs that person likes to hear. And then the program director's responsibility is to play that song as often as they can so that person will like it. And that's why the criticism stands that all commercial music sounds alike, all country music sounds alike, all hip hop sounds alike, all Christian music sounds alike. It sounds alike because this lady, Becky, which is the name she's been given, they test her. So literally in the bigger stations, they will bring in about 100 of these women. And in Christian music, it's a female 35 to 54-year-old. And they'll bring about 100 of them in, give them a remote dial, and they'll play about 200 snippets of songs. And she's instructed during those snippets to either turn that dial up or down, depending on whether she likes it or not. And of course, all that's aggregated into computers and graphs out. And it actually is a scoring mechanism of 0 to 4, or I'm sorry, 0 to 5, and nothing above a 4, the radio station will add. So I've been to a few of these, and it's brutal because your song, 10 seconds of your song goes by. By the way, that's all they play of it. You have to select a 10-second sample for them. They play that, and if your graph starts going down, you're ready to quit. But that's the way they determine what songs they're going to play, is by testing this lady that we call Becky. A lot of them do it now online. And there's a ton of criticism, justly deserved, but right now it's the way that all commercial formats decide what songs they're going to play.
Well, and I've added my voice to that chorus of criticism, and I'm going to, mention a few of those criticisms right now. Number one is that Christian radio, God bless Christian radio. I'm not really dinging on Christian radio that much, but probably somewhere between a third and a half of the listeners to Christian radio are not Christians.
Right.
And so you've basically got a lot of non-Christians deciding what's being played on Christian radio, and Christian radio just is a major determinant about what gets sung in the church. And what gets sung, I mean, I believe that the music in the church informs our theology, and so that if the music in the church is not theologically sound, then ultimately, sooner or later, the theology of that church is not going to be sound as well. But so that's my primary criticism, with using Becky as someone who basically is writing de facto writing the doctrinal statement.
Yeah.
But as you said, I'm sorry, John, go ahead.
Well, I would say, Warren, that there is still a bit of a distinctive in Christian music between what we call CCM, contemporary Christian music, and worship music. Like, people are probably familiar with K-Love and that brand. K-Love actually has two separate signals. The K-Love signal is CCM. They have a signal called Air One, which they describe as worship music.
Right.
And worship music they'll play live cuts of things. They'll play 6-minute long songs. They'll play things that are more customary, in a church setting. And honestly, I don't think they subject songs to the same rigor of testing that CCM does. They go with their gut more on that. And I think some of those people who give them feedback are more worship leaders. So it's not the same, but it does bleed over a lot. A lot of the songs are the same. It used to be a little more clear cut, where we would say A CCM song is more horizontal. It's person to person. It offers hope or encouragement to someone, where a worship song is more vertical and it's a lyric to God or about God. And those barriers continue to break down. We've had songs that I would have never called a worship song win a Dove for Worship Song of the Year. It's a little bit in the ear or heart of the beholder, I think, these days, but there is a distinctive there.
Yeah. Well, and I would say maybe we mentioned Andrew Peterson earlier. Andrew's "Is He Worthy" would be a song that I don't think Andrew intended to write a worship song, but
Right.
Chris Tomlin covered it, and all of a sudden it's a worship song and it's being played in church. So I guess, John, my point is that even though I've got my concerns, my lover's quarrel, as you might say, with that
Yes.
whole system and process, I heard you loud and clear a few minutes ago when you said this is the way it is. This is the
Right.
reality of the situation. So that brings me to a question for you. Given that reality, how now should John Mays live, or how now should Centricity live? I mean, because you guys are, you somehow managed to find success in that environment, and in an environment that has also shifted several times as well. I mean, with digital radio, with the rise of worship music, and I'm just wondering how you guys have done it. I know you've got a couple of kind of money makers, like Lauren Daigle, for example, is on your label. I'm sure you're really glad that she is on your label.
Amen.
But in aside from Lauren, and I mean, I think about Andrew. Andrew's been developed this massive, or this really passionate and loyal audience, but he doesn't really produce hits. And yet
Right.
you guys have stuck with him now for, I don't know, more than a
50
decade.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what's the secret sauce there?
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's probably appropriate to say, you got to be careful when you're talking about your successes, because God's favor has been on these people. The best you can hope to do on any given day is follow where he's leading, try to sense where he's going with any individual artist. And certainly Andrew has been cutting his own path creatively for what, 25, 30 years.
Right.
So you don't look at a guy like Andrew like you would Lauren or some other more CCM artist. And our job then is to find his community and try to support his music to that community and grow it as we can. And if people are Andrew fans, they know about the Rabbit Room and Hutch Mood and those sorts of things. So we try to show up in those spaces with music when he hasn't made a new record in quite a while. But I will say, Warren, that I guess it's been probably more than 10 years ago. I don't know. But he had a song called Dancing in the Minefields that our radio team was like, I think Christian radio might play that song. And they did. So, and Andrew certainly wasn't opposed to it. It's just like I mentioned this overlap before, where you can't ask an artist to do something that's outside of who they are authentically, right? That's when you start hearing phrases like "I sold out" or "I sold out for a hit" or whatever. And we never want to be responsible for an artist feeling that way. But to the place that they feel like I can legitimately and honestly have that song in my repertoire, and if radio's interested in it, awesome. And that song was good for us and for the sale of that record. So it's not so much that he's opposed to being on radio, as that's just not the kind of music he makes. If you listen to Christian radio very long, I mean, the lane lines are pretty narrow, and again, you'll get that criticism that everything sounds alike that's on there, and that's why. Uh, but it's not something that can't be said about all other commercial music formats. It's just the way of commercial music. And we have to be sensitive to that when we're asking someone to create a song that's for the radio. Obviously, we never sign someone that we don't already have that sort of figured out with them. Like, is this a radio artist? Is this a worship artist? Is this ministry? What is this? So all of that is we try to figure out way before they get signed.
Right. Well, 30 or 40 years ago, I think you could say that radio was not only king, but radio was pretty much everything. I mean, there was no
Yeah.
streaming, there was no nothing. Concert tours were often money losers and not money
Mhm.
makers. So, so fast forward to today, what, again, I'm trying to sort of get at, what is the formula? If an artist can be successful without radio, does that mean radio is not as dominant as it used to be? Is streaming more important? Is online presence with building community, important live shows? I'm assuming now, for most artists, they make money or they wouldn't do them.
Sure.
And so has the mix just changed that much over the last 20 years?
I would not say it has changed, but that it is changing. I mean, we're having this conversation during a real time of shift. I don't know if any of your listeners would have heard of Forrest Frank or Josiah Queen. Both of those artists had big breakthroughs last year. They're not on our label, but big breakthroughs to the point that their streaming numbers were so high that Christian radio had to play them. Like they're so popular with Christians, even though they didn't necessarily fit the format of K-Love or the Christian radio stations. They needed to add those songs because they were so popular. So we're in this era. We'll see what that continues to look like year on year. But right now, it feels like there's a shift away from the importance of radio. We still value it highly. It's still, I'll tell you a story here in a little bit about why we value it so highly, but it is still such an important tool for us from a marketing level. Radio seems to be, it's still the straw that stirs the drink, All the other numbers go up when radio starts to play a song. But there are plenty of artists, and we have some on our label, that they stream great numbers without radio. They just have these communities that support them. Those communities are thriving and growing, and they don't listen to Christian radio. A lot of those people. We've got Andrew is an older version of a younger guy we have named Chris Renzema, who's very much the same way. He came out of YWAM, already had a support base way before he released music, and he's their favorite son, and there's been now a community built with that at its core that's grown way beyond that now. Uh, so it just depends on the artist and where it's going, but it feels like right now we're in a shifting time where we want radio, but we don't have to have it in order for something to grow and find an audience.
So if any program directors or music directors are listening, let's just stipulate for the record, John Mays loves radio. So don't get,
It's still very important to us. That's true. And
John, I want to pivot in our conversation and kind of land this airplane. But before I do that, you mentioned a story about the importance of radio, the value of it. I'd like for you to go ahead and tell that before we move on.
This is in support of our mission statement, which is enabling our artists to create life-changing experiences for the world. And we could unpack that later too. But suffice it to say that years ago, I was wondering, like, are life-changing experiences happening? Do we know if that's happening or not? And how could we find out? And we began to gather these stories that people would, post online or mail that we would get or emails and things. People love to share these stories about the encounters they've had with our artists or music. So we began a tradition of reading those to each other at our Christmas gatherings. And I'm usually the one that sort of curates them. And, I don't know, maybe there's 60, 70, 100 of them to choose from, and we can't read all of them. But I have to be careful because so many of them, Warren, start with this sentence: I heard your song on the radio. I heard this song on the radio, and I wanted to reach out to someone to tell them what this song has meant for me or my family or my situation. So every time I see that, I feel like as much problem as the radio causes for not just us, all record labels, God is still using it, and it's important. The men and women that work at radio, very good people who are interested in ministry to their communities. I've known some of them for 30 and 40 years. They're awesome people. So I don't want to throw radio under the bus. Who knows what it will be the next time we talk 5 years from now, maybe. We'll see. But it's still a vital part of most artists' ministries.
Yeah. John, we do need to kind of land this plane, and I want to give you your day back. But I just want to ask kind of one question in closing, and get your thoughts about that. As I said early in the interview, you've had a long and distinguished career in Christian radio. You've worked with some artists that are just super respected in the genre, and I guess I'm wanting to just close by saying, what's the secret to your longevity and your artist longevity? Do you have any personal disciplines that sort of keep you honest, or do you require, as a label, do you require things of your artists? I'm guessing you probably have a moral turpitude clause in your contract, but everybody's got that, and I'm just wondering, are there conversations that you have with your artists about their spiritual life, and conversations that you have with yourself about your spiritual life? What does that sound like it look like for you?
Absolutely. Well, of course, the old adage, you can't lead where you haven't been before. And all these years, artists have challenged me in so many ways. Like, they need help that I'm not able to give them right now, right? I haven't been to the place that they're needing help from. So, in my own spiritual discipline, I'm always conscious of like where I'm not responsible for the spiritual growth of our artists, right? But I do want to take responsibility where it's needed and where I can. And I think there are artists that we've had over the years that would say, I didn't get any of that from Centricity. And there would be others that would say, I might not be here if Centricity had not been there for me. So for me personally, it might look more like growing a network. Like, one of the first things we ever did as a label was to sponsor a ministry called Porter's Call, a guy named Al Andrews, who started a counseling ministry for Christian artists. The idea, though, was that they could go without having to pay, because so many of them, especially at the beginning, don't have funds for that kind of thing. So the labels, and we're not the only ones, sponsor this ministry so that they can go for free. Because you realize pretty soon, like, they're walking in a place in the road, like maybe it's an addiction or some place that you may know about, but you don't know, other than prayer, how to help them. So you're sending them to people that you've established relationships with that might provide counseling, or a 3-day intensive that you got to send them to somewhere, or a pastor, financial people, vocal coaches, personal trainers. It extends to all kinds of things that I might not be able to lead them through, but I do take responsibility to help them when they're looking for it. And there have been a couple of times over the years, and literally maybe twice, that we have had to feel like we've needed to intervene. It's obvious that something is happening in this artist's life that they don't want to talk about, or they continue to deny. And so you have to sit down and confront them about it. But that's pretty rare. If they've gotten to a place where they're signed with us, we've done enough vetting of them and they of us. The kind of culture we have, the kind of people we want to work with, they either fit that or they don't. And so much of the fuel is spent on the launch pad, right? We do a lot of that work in the beginning so that hopefully those kind of surprises don't happen later on down the road.
Yeah, well, that's a good word, John. I love that so much of the fuel is spent on the launch pad. In other words, if you can get it right in the beginning, you can make sure that you're pointed to that true north, and that really makes a big difference. Well, John Mace, thank you so much for being on the program today. I could do this all day long.
You need time, Warren. I enjoyed it.
But just to honor and respect your time and our listeners' time, we should probably bring this to a close. But I'm grateful for your time today. I'm grateful for Centricity. I've been nourished by the work of Centricity over the years, and just sort of 1 or 2 or 3 degrees of separation. Some of my friends who know you really speak highly of you, and I just wanted to have this conversation because I think you and Centricity are unique in the Christian music world, and I'm grateful for that uniqueness and pray that your tribe might increase over the years.
Thank you so much. What a gift to get to be here, and I appreciate the kind words.